Southeast of Mumbai, in a range of rugged hills, a winding path ascends to the mouths of the Karla Caves. On weekends and holidays, when pilgrims crowd the neighboring temple, the caves echo with footsteps and chatter. But when the monsoon shadows the valley, and waterfalls rush from the surrounding cliffs, it's easy to imagine the solitude that drew Buddhist monks to this place 19 centuries ago. Although there are other Buddhist cave complexes nearby, nothing else in India compares with the Grand Chatya, or prayer hall, at Karla. It plunges deep into the cliff, soaring ceiling ribbed with age-blackened teak, the richly ornamented pillars along its walls marching toward the stupa at the distant end, where monks once walked endless circles around a relic of the Buddha. High on the pillars, neat lines of Brahmi script commemorate the donors who contributed to the hall's construction. The inscriptions are terse: name, native place, and little else. But in 6 cases, they mention an additional detail, that the donor was a Yavana, a Greek. The Greeks first entered India 4 centuries before the Karla caves were carved, when Alexander descended into the Punjab at the head of his invincible army. The conqueror spent a year and a half in the subcontinent, defeating local kings, taking cities, and leaving a string of garrisons in his wake. Then he was gone. It seemed, at first, that the Greek presence in India would be fleeting. Within a few years of Alexander's death, his Indian satrapies were absorbed into the growing empire of Chandragupta Maurya, whose successors would rule much of India for more than a century. But when the Mauryan dynasty began to crumble, Greeks were waiting on the frontiers. Just northwest of India, in what are now Afghanistan and the Central Asian republics, was the Greek kingdom of Bactria, famous for its 1,000 cities. The Bactrian kings were almost constantly at war, sparring with their Seleucid overlords, raiding the upstart Parthians, and pushing back incursions from the steppes. So when a political vacuum developed in northern India, they were quick to exploit it. The exact sequence of events is unclear, but it seems that the Bactrian king Demetrius I invaded India in the early 2nd century BC, conquering a large territory in the northwest. Soon after, likely as a consequence of civil war, the Indian province became an independent Greek kingdom. The rulers of the new Indo-Greek kingdom soon governed more of India than Alexander had ever conquered. Although their fortunes fluctuated, parts of northern India would remain under their rule until the 1st century AD. Too few and too isolated to remain a class apart, the Greeks in India soon began to adopt local customs. Toward the end of the 2nd century, Heliodorus, ambassador of the Indo-Greek king Antiochus, set up an imposing stone pillar beside a Hindu temple honoring the deity Vasudeva. Most of the Greeks in India, however, were drawn to a different religious tradition: Buddhism. Buddhism was already widespread in northwestern India by the time Alexander arrived, and continued to gain converts through the Mauryan era. Ashoka, greatest of the Mauryan emperors, was an energetic patron, founding monasteries, building stupas, and sending missionaries to every neighboring people, including the Greeks. Ashoka commissioned dozens of monumental inscriptions outlining the ethical precepts of Buddhism. 2 of these, discovered near Kandahar, Afghanistan, were written in elegant Greek, a sign that at least a few Greeks were involved in the king's proselytizing project. The inscriptions claim that missionaries were sent to all the Greek kingdoms of the East. According to later Buddhist tradition, some of these missionaries were Greeks themselves. By the time the Bactrians conquered northwestern India, in short, many Eastern Greeks were familiar with Buddhism. Within a century of the conquest, some of the most important men in the Indo-Greek kingdom would identify themselves as Buddhists. A provincial governor named Theodorus, for example, dedicated a Buddhist reliquary, and another Greek governor established a stupa. Many wealthy Greeks, like the benefactors at Karla, were commemorated as donors in Buddhist cave monasteries. Menander, the ruler who brought the Greek kingdom in India to the pinnacle of its strength and prosperity, was almost certainly a Buddhist. He patronized Buddhist shrines, put the 8-spoked Dharma wheel on some of his coins, and even appeared, though long after his reign, as the protagonist of a Buddhist text in which he shrewdly debates a learned monk. Upon his death, Menander's ashes were enshrined in stupas, where they were revered like the relics of the Buddha himself. Menander's successors seem to have imitated his pro-Buddhist policies. Most of the later Indo-Greek kings described themselves as followers of the Dharma on their coins. At Taxila, their capital, a Buddhist shrine and stupas stood beside temples to Hindu and Greek gods. In the 1st century AD, just as the Indo-Greek kingdom was collapsing, contact between India and the rest of the Greek world was renewed. Merchants based in the great Egyptian city of Alexandria had discovered that the monsoon winds would carry ships swiftly and relatively safely from the mouth of the Red Sea to the western coast of India. Spurred by Roman demand for spices, hundreds of ships were soon crossing the Arabian Sea. Pliny the Elder complained that 100 million sestertii were being traded to Indian merchants every year. The substance, if not the scale of this claim, is confirmed by the hordes of Roman coins still being discovered in every corner of India. The Arabian Sea trade brought more than silk and spices to the Mediterranean world. Indians also made the trip west, establishing a small community in Alexandria. One Indian visitor, possibly a Buddhist monk, made his way to Athens, where he caused a sensation by burning himself alive in the presence of Augustus. Despite this contact with India and Indians, the Greeks of the Mediterranean world remained virtually ignorant of Buddhism. Greco-Roman descriptions of Indian religion confuse the Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain traditions, and tend to be heavily influenced by accounts of Alexander's first encounters with the Indian ascetics the Greeks called gymnosophists. The first mention of the Buddha in a classical text was made by a Christian apologist who noted in passing that a sect of Indian philosophers revered a certain Bhota as a god on account of his holiness. Another stray reference appeared in a work of St. Jerome, who erroneously described the Buddha as a founder of a sect of gymnosophists. Despite its obscurity, Buddhism may have influenced an important development in Greek thought. The philosopher Pyrrho of Elis accompanied Alexander to India, where he conversed with monks and ascetics. When he returned to Greece, Pyrrho taught that the goal of existence should be freedom from worry, and that the only way to achieve this freedom was to suspend all judgment about the nature of reality. The parallel with Buddhism, in particular the idea of virtue as an escape from suffering, is intriguing, though the degree to which Pyrrho was actually inspired by Buddhist doctrine remains unclear. In any case, even if the Indian roots of Pyrrho's thought can be proven, Buddhism was never an important presence in the ancient Mediterranean. But in India, where so many Greeks became Buddhist converts and patrons, the encounter between East and West had lasting consequences. For centuries, it had been customary to represent the Buddha with symbols, often footprints, an empty seat, or the Bodhi tree. But in the later years of the Indo-Greek kingdom, anthropomorphic representations of the Buddha began to appear. These first images of the Buddha, especially associated with the Gandhara region, show clear signs of Greek influence. They stand like Greek statues. Their expressions and hairstyles resemble those of Greek antecedents. They wear Greek-style tunics, with the finely folded drapery characteristic of Hellenistic art. The fact that most works of Gandhara-style art appeared after the fall of the Indo-Greek kingdom has raised questions about the nature of the Greek influence on Buddhist iconography. It remains uncertain whether the earliest depictions of the Buddha emerged directly from a native Indo-Greek tradition, or whether ideas and craftsmen arriving via the new Roman trade route played an important role. Whatever its origins, the Greek strain in Buddhist art would have a long history, moving with the faith into Central Asia, China, and Japan. The image of the Buddha changed as it traveled. But even today, in shrines and sanctuaries across Asia and beyond, it bears traces, faint but real, of the Greek encounter with Buddhism 2 millennia ago. If you are not a subscriber, please consider joining the channel. I post a new video about the ancient Greeks or Romans at least once a week. If you would like to help me continue the work of recording and researching, I encourage you to visit my Patreon page. And if you're trying to fill those long and desolate days between Told in Stone videos, I urge you to check out my book, Naked Statues, Fat Gladiators, and War Elephants. Thanks for watching.